Yeah, Gail's gonna have to fix that one.
This is Gail Morgan welcoming you to the Libertarian Counterpoint. Now, your host, James Just.
And thank you for joining us today. With me is John Cameron and Richard Fields. Gentlemen, cancel culture has exploded in the news this week, and it's gone everywhere from Abe Lincoln to Dr. Seuss to Pepe Le Pew, and it's not a left or a right issue. We've watched cancel culture kind of evolve on both sides of it, and that's what's really dangerous with it is there's actually no controlling sense. It's just this kind of out of control cultural phenomenon. It's you guys have anything about that?
The thing that interests me about the whole concept of cancel culture is the left wants to cancel their opponents on the right. The right wants to cancel their opponents on the left. And by cancel, we mean shut them up, deny them a forum, deny them jobs if possible, make them into non-entities. And the ironic thing is that there's not very much difference between the right and the left when it comes to the issues that matter. I'm talking about the economy, I'm talking about fiscal policy, monetary policy. The issues that actually have an impact on the average person's life are almost exactly the same. Foreign policy, whether you have to send your kids to war or not, very similar between left and right. Biden is already launching strikes into Syria. Simply because the establishment or the deep state or whatever you want to call the people who actually control the levers of power, whatever you want to call them, they have their own agenda. They keep us fighting with each other on superfluous issues, and we'll talk about some of those superfluous issues today. But one of them is Dr. Seuss. Another one is whether or not Mr. Potato Head is Mr. or Mrs. or neutral, all kinds of silly stuff that really has no impact whatsoever on the way people actually live on a day-to-day basis. It affects their sense of what's acceptable, their sense of what's should be aired in the public square, but it has no real effect on people's lives. But we spend all the time about minutia and none of our time paying any attention to what's going on issues that really count. And cancel culture simply accentuates all that. That said, I'm against cancel culture. I think it's a method of eliminating free speech that's to be decried.
Well, I'm for cancel culture as long as I get to be in charge of it. But
you can do the canceling.
And no, I'm against it as well. And I think, you say the left and right are both guilty of it, and all the rest of that. I would like to find a way to avoid having a conversation where there's two sides, where we always talk about the left, where we always talk about the right. And I think Richard had a wonderful point that there is no real major difference between the two. I think the battle that needs to be drawn is not from people who might believe in self-label as conservative or self-label as liberal, but from people who believe that giving power to government is a good thing versus people who believe that taking power from the government is a good thing. And I think that's where we need to redraw the battle lines. Now, I do think that because so many of the people who report what's the so-called news or create what's so-called the news, and so many people in publishing and entertainment are of the left-wing bias versus the right wing, even though the corporations are typically owned, at least except for the high-tech ones in Silicon Valley, by people who would formerly be labeled as conservative, that the bias is against what you might label as traditional American values in some ways. It's certainly, if you look, for example, I'm trying to get a couple of books published, and if you look at the background of everybody in the world of fiction publishing anyway, you will see from the kind of books they publish to where they went to school to personal statements and all the rest of that that there's a certain bias out there. So anything that they look at allowing through their filter for the general public to absorb goes through those biases. And so That's why the popular television we see is all about cops breaking the law, but it's in a good cause, and DAs cutting corners and all the rest of that. So the bias is there. The idea that the ACLU used to, Richard remembers, I think, I certainly remember when the ACLU used to defend people's liberties, especially First Amendment rights. And the most egregious thought was the most heavily defended, because their core belief at that time was that open dialogue, where any kind of crazy idea or notion or thought deserved a voice, because if you stifle those voices, then we run into what happened in communist China or the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany or Zimbabwe or Venezuela or now here. So I think that's it. It's horrible. I think what we should be doing is promoting outrageous voices so that people think. And now we're being pitted against each other, like Richard says, based upon pretty superfluous, pretty random things, like the idea that somehow Dr. Seuss stories or portray racial stereotypes, and therefore any story that has someone in a grass skirt can't be published, or someone holding a bowl of rice and having slits for eyes shouldn't be published, or all the rest of that. And even the idea that somehow boys and girls sections in well, anyway, that's another subject. But I think I would like to see people welcome outrageous ideas rather than be offended.
Yeah. The original, you mentioned the ACLU, their original free speech case was defending Nazis' right to march in a Jewish community in Illinois. Mm-hmm. That wouldn't happen today. Would not happen today. No. And that it's George Orwell's prophecy, and I'm paraphrasing here. I probably will get it somewhat wrong, but he said, "Those who control history control the future." Mm-hmm. And what's happening with cancel culture? People are trying to control history, control what's being said about what has happened. That's controlling history, so that the cancelers, can control the future, because the point of view, their point of view on what is historical, defines what is allowable and what is okay going forward.
Well, how are we supposed to understand the journey? How are we supposed to understand the journey of where we've come from if we can't go back and look? One of the things we've taken about, every city has a right to have their own statues and decide what goes in their own town squares. And people said, well, if we take them down, it's fine, because you can still go to books and you can still look in the books. You can still read about history. But they're taking the books away now. They're sitting there saying, you can't read the books that have these references to how people used to talk and how people used to draw pictures, because we've now find them offensive. But they weren't strong enough. They weren't strong enough images. They weren't strong enough ideas to keep us from to keep us from evolving past them. So they're clearly not strong enough to drag us back there.
That's very
Mark Twain wouldn't get published today because his novels, Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, included, used the N-word. And Mark Twain was one of the most anti-racist writers of his time. Mm-hmm. So it's self-defeating as well.
Well, and I think that I agree with both of you, and that was a very good point, James. What galls me is that people, on the one hand, who talk about cancel culture and racism, then proceed to identify people's goals, needs, wants, and values based upon the color of their skin or their gender. So when you can get people to do battle along those lines, they forget to talk about what Richard brought up earlier, which is, why are we bombing targets in Syria? Why are we spending money that we don't have? It's COVID relief. What a bunch of crap! It's not a COVID relief. It's fine. They still haven't spent all the money they stole last time. So it's the important things aren't being talked about, because the whether it's the deep state or whoever it is, is succeeding in making us focus on or feeding us only things that are, basically the way somebody parts their hair. That we're fighting about that when we need to take a real look at what this massive bureaucracy that has power over everything is doing. And that's the, we're being shiny bracelet, look at shiny bracelet while somebody's picking our pocket. And
yeah, I mean, to get back to the original crux of what's being canceled, the answer to bad speech or bad speech is good speech, counter speech. That's the answer, not censoring bad speech. It's providing the alternative, providing the rebuttal, the counterpoint, which is what we do.
Yeah, well, an individual piece of cancel is like a piece of straw. It's not very heavy. Doesn't really matter. But a bale of straw weighs a lot, and it takes a lot to carry it around. And so when we just talk about cancel culture, Dr. Seuss or a statue or Abe Lincoln individually doesn't matter. But over time, we're going to have this big, huge pile of cancel that we're not going to be able. We're going to have to figure out what to do with. And speaking of figuring out what to do with, Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, is fallen into the hole of his own making. His own lies, deceptions, and personal behaviors are finally coming home to roost. And what is interesting to watch is many of us, even from 3,000 miles away, are going, what took them so long to figure this out?
Well, I think there's some, when you, let a politically powerful family member be interviewed by his brother on what's supposed to be the news, and have him write, press releases basically that are propaganda pieces, and then give him an Emmy for them, and then have him control investigating questions about his behavior by appointing people that do the investigating. Have I left anything out? You're pretty much doomed to have crazy go on, and now it's being brought forth. I think there's a really interesting quote. Well, there's three at least stories coming out about women staffers being harassed by what's his first name? Cuomo? I don't know. Andrew. Now I keep getting him mixed up with his brother.
I get their whole family mixed up.
Talking head. And his defense to it was that I never inappropriately touched a woman. So the questions weren't that he was being slapped around about, weren't, did you grope this woman or whatever. They were about, his behaviors making people uncomfortable, and overtures and innuendo and all the rest of that. And he responded by saying, that's like you walking up and punching somebody, and when somebody gets mad about it, you say, I didn't shoot him. So he's still trying to control the dialogue, and he's being caught when part of the political power circle. I think there's a Democratic attorney general in New York State's going after him. They're starting to turn on him. There's major Democrats, whatever that means, asking him to either resign or step down or issue an apology. All the rest of that. I think that's a very good sign. I mean, we saw the same thing with if the behavior that Bill Clinton did was okay because he was a Democrat. And it wasn't until maybe 20 years later they said, well, maybe we shouldn't have been so supportive of Bill being a dog, a hound. I can't say what kind of hound, but and it was okay because he was a Democrat. But
it's interesting.
Weinstein, the same thing.
We're looking at politicians being sexual predators, essentially. And what we're really talking about is people of power or in positions of power being sexual predators. And it goes back a long ways. It goes back as far as LBJ, JFK, as you mentioned, Bill Clinton, certainly Donald Trump.
Roosevelt.
Yeah, FDR. I mean, all of the big the names who are so popular that we know them by their initials. all of them were, or most of them, or many of them were sexual predators.
Mhm.
Why are they able to get by with being sexual predators? Because they're in a position of power.
Mhm.
And that's luckily, or I think admirably, starting to end a little bit as a result of the Me Too movement. And I think we should applaud that. I think we should say, good. Clinton got what was coming to him eventually. So did Trump. So did by not being reelected, and so now is Cuomo, who might get impeached or certainly not reelected.
I think we have to thank, and I don't thank him for the aberrant behavior. Is it Harvey Weinstein? Really, he was from what's come out, a filthy man, and who used his position of power in an industry where the controlling the purse strings and who gets a part and who gets funded and what gets publicity and all the rest of that, and capital. And he was untouchable for years and years and years because he was a huge political donor. They ignored the bad things he did because he wrote big checks. And then once people started coming forward, they went, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't have ignored those things, despite the big checks. And that seemed to open the floodgate. And that was right during the time of the Me Too. So, I'd love to see a day where a young boy or a young girl can where the word casting couch will have to be explained to them, and in the entertainment industry. And I think that's the wonderful thing about capitalism versus the power in government. Now, Weinstein was in media, but capital is colorblind. Capital doesn't care what sex you are, what your sexual orientation is, what your religion is. Capital cares about how it's treated. And a capitalist doesn't care whether you're a little green man from Mars or whether you're white or black, white like rice, or whatever. If you take it and massage it and make more of it, it has little babies, more money are created, then you're well loved. And so I think the big plan for us, if we want to improve the world, is to get autocratic power out of the way and let the power of the market make sure that people are treated evenly and fairly with respect.
Okay, well, I think the second part of this story is that the news media knew all this and ignored it while sitting there claiming that they cared about lies. And we can't have respect how are you supposed to have respect if no one's telling you the truth?
Well,
Because respect starts with the truth.
I think another benefit of all of this is that people are distrustful of experts now, and they're distrustful of the media, and they need to be distrustful of experts. And they need to be distrustful of the media, and maybe that will filter through, and they'll become as distrustful of the greatest evil, which is autocratic government. People who are untouchable, and there are starting to be more and more people talking about getting rid of qualified immunity. Justin Amash brought forth a bill to get rid of it, and then the person who's now carrying basically the same bill with their name on it is completely 180 degrees opposed to almost everything Justin Amash ever did. But the concept that people in positions of power, people that hold guns or can take government money and move it around, should be held to at least the same standard as a civilian, is a wonderful thing. So I think, despite the cancel culture and everything, maybe there's light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe I'm too much of an optimist. I don't know.
Hey, well, maybe there is some room for optimism if you kind of want to hold government accountable. The recall Newsom milestone, they've hit like 2 million signatures, they say. And they go through a process where they're having a private company verify this before they send them off to be verified by the government. So they're saying they're up at 2 million now, which means theoretically the recall is a high probability that we are going to.
Yeah, which puts us back into the duel between blue and red. And I'm not sure that there's a viable or even attractive candidate who can actually beat Newsom in a recall election, particularly when there are 3 or 4 who are going to be making that effort. They'll split the anti-Newsom vote, and Newsom will probably end up winning in a recall election, and that it becomes kind of pointless at some point.
Well, I think with the difference in voter registration being what 22% Democrat versus Republican, and oh, by the way, most people don't really line up with either one of those parties, but they're convinced that they have to vote for A and B. How about C? None of the above. Or would that
Now,
be
how
D?
about D, Libertarian?
Libertarian?
I'm
Well,
sure there will
no. How about we
I'm
just
sure
move
there'll be a
Libertarian
Libertarian
up to A?
candidate running for governor, and that is where any intelligent vote needs to go.
Well, when you have the nanny state and people being convinced that especially it really, really bothers me that the people who are most affected by the ineptness and the skullduggery of government are the people who are most firmly convinced that government is their only hope. You have people, holding teachers up as icons of truth and justice, yet those teachers are making 3 times the money they'll ever make and will retire way earlier than they ever will to a lifestyle they'll never see. But they're untouchable. So, it's I can't see anybody beating them in an election, but the recall itself sends a message, and that message is that at least 2 million people were upset enough with you to go out of their way to write something down and challenge you. And the nice thing about the political process is you don't have to win an election to damage bad government. You simply have to.
Certainly the recall election will have the unintended or perhaps intended consequence of modifying the governor's behavior and making him think twice about some of the silly stuff that he has been doing and would do in the future.
I hope.
Yeah. Well, they're so dependent. These so focus so much on feeding their activists, feeding the people who write them checks, that they're ignoring the average person, and the average person is saying, "Hey, enough of this. Pay attention to what you're supposed to be doing."
And I think the little bit that I read about it said that the schools will be open by the time the election happens, but the pain is going to last forever. I mean, parents watching their children stumble for a year they might never catch up on, while during the whole time Gavin Newsom was sending his kids to a private school. That kind of corrupt thinking, the pain people felt where one person in the household would have to stop working so that they could homeschool their kids, while these politicians partied and went to Hawaii and ate at one of the most expensive restaurants on the planet, and their kids are all going to school. And the fact that just about half of public school teachers send their kids to private schools. I mean, these messages, I hope eventually that the voting populace realizes that there's something wrong, and don't buy into the propaganda. And so I think it will do some good.
Well,
anyway.
Let's hope so, because as we're all sitting here struggling and with dealing with the coronavirus and putting our lives back together, what they're doing down at the state capitol is they're examining passing a law to ban boys and girls departments in major department stores. Yeah. Yes, because that's the major problem of our time, is deciding which way to manufacture a future society. It's this whole thing.
I have 2 daughters who are very strong women. Both of them in business and successfully in business and entrepreneurial and all the rest. And I support a very, very strong role for women. My mother was a strong woman. She ran the family business when I was growing up. I think strong women and equally strong men is to be admired. What I don't think is that whether somebody plays with dolls, if that's their preference, or plays with tractors or trucks, if that's their preference, has a discernible long-term impact. Let kids play with what the hell they want to play with. We don't need to be at the state level micromanaging what kids can play with, what toys they can play with. Parents can do that. Certainly kids will figure it out on their own, what they would rather play with, and let individualism flourish and flower at a very young age, rather than creep out when people are past the age where they can actually do something about it.
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree with that. I'm getting some interference from somewhere on my my end. I think what's hilarious is, so they're actually going to make it more difficult for people to make consumer choices. So if you're looking for a bra, I fortunately don't need one. I haven't gained that much weight yet, despite sitting 20 feet from my refrigerator for most of the pandemic. I think as consumers, you would want to see signage that said somewhere that led you to where there's bras. And if you're, looking for an athletic supporter, you might want to see the same thing. Human bodies are male and female bodies are different. Clothing cut for a man doesn't sit well on typical women, and vice versa. There are certain seams that have to be in different places, and all the rest of that. So the idea that somehow this is going to help people stay away from forced biases about gender norms or whatever is just ludicrous. It's another shiny bracelet being held up to distract. And I don't know, is just boys and girls or men's and women's department? Does the nanny state think that
no, it's for the children. It's for the children, just boys and girls.
This is for the children, John. It's always for the children. But here's what I don't understand. You're complaining about artificial social constructs. So you're going to mandate an artificial social construct. You're actually doing the exact same thing you're complaining about. You're literally imposing an artificial social construct on people through the law, rather than through just kind of generic social pressures is how cultures and civilizations evolve. You're literally doing the exact same thing you're complaining about, but 10 times worse because you're forcing this view of other people on your view of life on other people. You're literally taking exactly what you're complaining about and say, I'm going to do more of that and then claim I'm morally superior.
We see that.
Yeah, my view of the way the world works is correct. Therefore, I'm going to force my view of the world on everybody by force of law. It's arrogance and it's lack of humility to the max.
Yeah,
unlike the humble and people on this panel who are full of humility, but we're. Yeah.
Well, John, we may be arrogant. We may think we're right, but we don't want to force everybody else to live our way.
We're not saying that.
No,
being funny.
Well, John, we are.
Yeah.
We do think we're right.
I
but
think,
we don't think we're so right that we can force other people to live the way we want them to.
Absolutely.
That's the difference.
I'm reminded every day by my wife about how humble I need to be.
Yeah. Well, and my wife's right now, I think, standing about 8 feet from me, and she reminds me more than once a day that I need to understand who the real decision maker is.
Well, around here, the real decision maker is the clock, and we are out of time. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you all for watching. Join us next week here at LibertarianCounterpoint.com on Facebook and all your various social media platforms. Good night, and please remember to love everybody.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.